Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gray Havens podcast. My name is Dave Radford, part of the band The Gray Havens, and in today's episode we're talking about our song, Have You Heard It? And this song is particularly, important is maybe the word, special to me. We'll dig into why that is in the podcast itself, but before we get started, quick announcement in case you haven't heard already. We are bringing Blue Flower to the stage this spring. Very soon we're going to be headed out on tour, so if you live anywhere close to a city where we're coming to play this show, we would love to see you there. We're going to try to make it special, and all that ticket information you can find on our website, thegrayhavensmusic.com. And that is it for announcements. So without further ado, here we go. My original plan was to talk a little bit about this song and then play some of it, but my instinct has become more to let you guys hear the intro and the first verse before I do any kind of backstory. So here is the intro and verse 1 of Have You Heard It?
Can you remember the seagulls cry? Though, have you heard it? Where the waves break gotta get back.
If you've been a listener of this podcast for any amount of time, you might not be that surprised to learn that this song was first inspired by a book called Planet Narnia. And actually it was one of the earliest instances where I highlighted something in that book and thought, I think I want to write a song about this. And it's a passage in the book. It's at the end of the author Michael Ward's chapter on Jupiter. I won't read a ton of this, but basically, he's referencing the scene at the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Susan, Lucy, Peter, and Edmund are all hiking up to the castle at Cair Paravel with Aslan. They've defeated the White Witch, and they're going to be coronated. They're going to be crowned high kings and high queens of Narnia. And just before that happens, there's this little narration by C.S. Lewis that Michael Ward picks up on. So I'm going to read the quote from Lewis and then the commentary from Michael Ward. And this really does kind of set the scene for this particular song. So here we go. Quote, "They began marching eastward down the side of the great river. And the next day after that, at about tea time, they actually reached the mouth. The castle of Cair Paravel on its little hill towered up above them. Before them were the sands with rocks and little pools of salt water and seaweed, and the smell of the sea, and long miles of bluish-green waves breaking forever and ever on the beach. And oh, the cry of the seagulls. Have you heard it? Can you remember?" All right, so that's ending the quote of that section of the book. Here's Michael Ward. Quote, "The two questions which the narrator asks the reader are curious. Have we heard the seagulls cry, and can we remember it? Can we remember it? If we have heard it, of course we can remember it. But literal memory here is not the point. What the narrator after is something far deeper, something beyond the limited time frame of human life and human memory. He tells us that the waves break forever and ever, as if they belong to an eternal realm. And this is indeed what he's wanting to evoke, what the whole book has been intended to evoke, a glimpse of supernatural reality. a window onto an aspect of the divine nature. End quote. So I got done reading that section of the book and thought, I want to try my hand at writing music for this scene and, eventually lyrics. So that was the task in my mind. And it wasn't until about a year later when I actually sat down to write it. And it became for me my favorite song on the album, or maybe favorite song word to use. Maybe it's in a different category of, this is the song after I listen to I feel the most, or, while I'm listening to the song. So, and really that's because it just gets at the heartbreak of the entire theme of the album, which is the blue flower, which symbolizes this longing and unsatisfied desire, more desirable than any satisfaction. And so this song, I think maybe more than any other song, expresses that heartache, at least to me. So what I'll do now is solo some of the stuff you've been hearing in the background. It was the main patch or sound that I found in a sound library. I think the patch is called Summer Castle. It's a synth. And I was so inspired by that to write to. And you've already been hearing it a little bit in the background, but I'll turn that pad up along with the other kind of atmospheric stuff and then fade everything up going into verse 2. We'll listen through verse 2 and then I'll break down some of the production and lyrics.
Lost for the moment, the broad fields of sky, and oh, for the morning, it never shuts his eyes, and I've gotta get back someday.
I have to highlight Ben Shive's expertise here on the vocode. He came up with this arrangement for this vocal section that I love and just want to solo here for a second.
I've gotta get back someday. I gotta get back.
Quick side note, the lyrics for that verse that you just heard were actually taken from a poem by John Milton. I think it's called Comus, but in one of the biographies that I read about C.S. Lewis in writing for this album, the author of the biography talked about this poem and its significance to Lewis. Lewis called this particular poem that I'm about to read the best thing of all. So beautifully lonely and romantic. And what he meant by romantic was not romantic in the sense that we think of it in relationship, but romantic in the sense of evoking the longing that he talks about. So here is that line from the poem. It says, quote, "To the ocean now I fly, and those happy climes that lie where day never shuts his eye, up in the broad fields of sky." End quote. And it just so happened that I remembered this poem when it came to writing the lyrics for the song, and it seemed to fit. So moving on, after this verse, there's a musical transition that's pretty drastic from free floating and ethereal, atmospheric to pretty, okay, now we're locked in on a grid. There's a scene change here. It feels a little bit more serious, a little bit more urgent and epic. And here's what that transition sounds like.
No, I never seem to catch it. The feeling where you coming in, where you coming from. never see the water come, just the imprint of the wave left on the sand in the sun.
One of the most famous writings of C.S. Lewis is his sermon, Weight of Glory. And there's this part in it that I want to read. It's pretty fascinating. Very much deals with this song, and it's almost like an older Lewis who has now become a Christian talking to a younger, non-believing Lewis. And he's talking about joy and what else in this podcast anyways. And I'm going to read it real quick. It says, quote, "The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited." End quote. I have a really hard time believing that Lewis had anything other than the blue flower in mind that he mentions early in his book, Surprised by Joy, when he talks about that scent of a flower we have not found. I have no proof, but that is my guess. There's a part late in Lewis's book, Surprised by Joy, where he's reflecting on all of the times that he's sort of watched and waited for this appearance of joy in his life. And when it did happen, he'd become pretty introspective and try to self-analyze himself and figure out, okay, what is actually happening in me that is, combining together to make this experience what it is. But he found that when he did that, it would kind of ruin the experience itself, and eventually discovers that all of the sensation that's left over when he finally turns his attention inward after he, has the experience, he basically decides that none of that's important. He says, quote, "I saw that all my waitings and watchings for joy, all my vain hopes to find some mental content on which I could, so to speak, lay my finger and say, this is it, had been a futile attempt to contemplate the enjoyed." Stay with me. "All that such watching and waiting ever could find would either be an image, like Asgard, the Western Garden, or whatnot, or a quiver in the diaphragm. I should never have to bother again about these images or sensations. I knew now that they were merely the mental track left by the passage of joy, not the wave, but the wave's imprint on the sand." So that is the inspiration for the second half of the song lyrically, with the imprint of the wave left on the sand in the sun part. And that is, I think, where we'll leave it as far as the lyrics go. Have a little bit of time left. We can dig into some of the production choices that we made on this second half of the song. The original spark, again, was the scene at the ocean on the shoreline. So I was trying to keep that in mind when we were creating the arrangement for this one. And we found this whistling in the wind sound that, I don't know, somehow did it for us. There's some whale noises. I think there was this sound library with whale noises, or, like if you're underwater. I've never been in the ocean underwater with a whale singing, but there was something to that effect that we included in the arrangement. So I'll just highlight a few things and bring everything else up as I usually do. Here is that second half.
Seem to catch you, feeling where you coming in, where you coming from. Oh, I never see the water coming, just the imprint of the wave left on the sand in the sun. Someday
is where we are going to leave it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening, and tune in next time for our next podcast. It's going to be the second to last in this series of podcast episodes on our song-by-song breakdown from each of the tracks from Blue Flower, and the next song up, I think, is a song called Anyone. So we'll tackle that next time. Thanks again for listening. Here is the entirety of Have You Heard It?
Can you remember the seagulls cry? Though, have you heard it? Where the waves break gotta get back someday. Lost for the moment, the broad fields of sky, and oh, for the morning, it never shuts his eyes. And I've gotta get back someday. Gotta get back. Gotta get back. No, I never seem to catch it. The feeling where you coming in, where you coming from. Oh, I never see the water coming. Just the imprint of the wave left on the sand in the sun. Oh, I never seem to catch it. The feeling where you coming in, where you coming from. Oh, I never see the water coming. Just the imprint of the wave left on the sand in the sun.